Hi, everyone. Welcome to my talk. So my name is Serhat Can. John made a short intro before the keynote, so thanks for coming here. So I'm going to talk about SOC2, our journey specific today. So I want to ask, before I start, do you guys have any idea about, what SOC2 is, or just, want to learn more about it? Any one of you had this SOC2 process already? No? How many of you are working for a startup, maybe less than 100 people? Okay, not many, but okay. So we are a small startup, about 13 people right now, so we'll see how it goes. Today I'm going to talk about SOC2, but it's not going to be a deep dive in all the details of SOC2. It's going to be about our experience. Like, what are the things that you should focus on when you need to actually, do the SOC2 stuff. That's really important because you are going to waste time. You are going to waste a lot of money. So that's an important decision to make. But before, I'm co-founder of Resmo, a company called Resmo. We are 1.5 years old company, still new. Before, I was a founding engineer at Opsgenie. I'm not sure if you heard about Opsgenie, but the engineering side was in Turkey. We had a big team in Boston as well. And then Atlassian acquired Opsgenie, so I worked at Atlassian for about 3 more years as an evangelist. So I was traveling around the world. This is my first time after 2 years of break, giving a talk, so I'm excited. But literally, this was part of my job before. I'm also part of the DevOps Days Global Co-Organization. Probably, you are familiar with DevOps Days. There are a lot of DevOps Days happening in US. I'm mostly working with the EMA region, obviously. I'm also an AWS hero, relatively an old one now. So it's been a while. I don't know how time flies, but yeah. So, folks, for some reason, if you are going to be close to Turkey, just feel free to let me know. I will help you guys with everything. And we will have an event in Turkey on 6th of May, and Jeff Barr is doing our keynote. We have Ajay Nair, head of AWS Lambda, many other great folks coming, all the way from US, all the way from, Europe. So we are going to have a great event, about 500 people. So it's going to be a big one in Istanbul. So if you want to join us, let me know. I will be happy to help you guys. So just a bit of background about Resmo, because that will help you guys understand why we started our SOC2 journey really early. So we are a cybersecurity company. Basically, what we do is we give you insights on what's happening inside your tools, cloud, SaaS. We connect these tools with one click and give you, asset visibility and security. So if there's anything risky going on, we'll let you know. So that means we have, even though it's read-only access, we have access to these, configuration data. Your AWS, your Google Workspace, Okta. These are critical data. So when we started, we knew that some of our potential customers would just ask for SOC2 because we had this problem. We started very late, the SOC2 journey at Opsgenie. Customers started asking that after 2 years. But with Resmo, it's more of because we are a cybersecurity company, it came up early. So we decided to just start working on it because we knew that it would be much easier if we start early. So we started our SOC 2 Type 1 compliance in, I think, 7 months ago. So we just got our report, Type 1 report. Yay. Yeah, it took a while with all the stuff I'm going to talk about. But before, just to give you a glimpse of what SOC 2 is. Think of the sea, think of the ocean. California is beautiful. But if you are, when you think about the ocean, this is what you imagine. It's just pure water. You're relaxed, right? It's amazing. But if you don't know where you're swimming, right, there could be sharks. I guess around here it's more common. So you have to really know, where you are swimming at. If not, you have to get ready. The internet is the same. There are cybersecurity threats happening all the time. So you have to kind of have that knowledge of at least the fundamentals of this fundamental security level to be able to swim safe. And that's why actually all these companies asking for SOC 2 reports, because SOC 2 reports is an attestation, is a report that would show your customers that you actually did something for to protect their data, to protect yourself. to protect your product. So that's why they're asking for it. Especially as a startup, if they want to be your customers, I mean, they would be hesitant because you're a small company, your resources are limited. There may be a chance that you didn't do all this, important stuff. And that's very common, obviously, as an early stage startup. That's why they ask for it. I think it's more like having a SOC 2 is like knowing that where you're swimming at and also putting a life jacket. I mean, doing all the fundamental stuff before actually you start selling to enterprises, right? So that's why it's important to show that you are doing this stuff. And obviously, many startups, they are just getting SOC 2 because they want to sell their product. That's the sales part is the key. So not gonna lie, but for us, I think it also helped us a lot with fundamental security stuff. We feel more confident. So for those who don't know what SOC 2 is, SOC 2 is how it's called, System and Organizations Controls 2. It's an auditing framework. That's important. So there is a Twitter bot. Whenever someone tweets SOC 2 compliance, it replies like SOC 2 is not a compliance, it's a framework, so you get a report. So it's not an official compliance thing. But it's very common in US especially. Almost, if you're a SaaS solution, for example, almost everyone would ask for SOC 2. So it's an auditing framework that assesses the effectiveness of a company's controls and procedures, whether they are in place or not. And they look at 5 pillars. So we are gonna talk a little bit about those in the upcoming slide. So security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Those are the 5 pillars of SOC 2. So the other important piece is there are 2 types of SOC 2. I mean, the most common ones, type 1 and type 2. So it's always a question, especially as a startup, should you get the type 1 or type 2 first? So for us, we started with type 1 because I think it's, so the difference, let me say the difference first. So basically the difference is type 1 is just at a specific point validates that you have controls in place. After that, they don't do the, continuous checks. I mean, it's just at that period of time, you were doing that, but after that, maybe you stopped doing this stuff. So, but SOC 2 type 2 is basically continuously monitoring. It means you are continuously monitoring your, procedures, maybe every 6 months, every year, and you are getting these reports continuously. So for most large enterprises, they would ask for type 2, but in many cases, type 1 is enough, and then you would say that you are gonna start your type 2 and probably sign something, and you can just continue. The advantage of starting with type 1, if your organization is not really familiar with this kind of like compliance stuff, it would give you a taste of it because it would also help you, give you more time to get ready. Like you would be able to stop and wait for a while before you get type 2. But if you start type 2, you would just have to do it every year. For a startup, I think it makes sense to start with type 1, but you can always start with type 2 as well. It depends on how many customers are asking for this report. That's the key part, I would say. So as I mentioned, there are 5 different pillars. So you don't have to do all this stuff, all 5. You could just pick, for example, security and availability, and your CPAs would write the report for these 2. I mean, for many startups, security is usually, they take the security one. For us, we are doing all of them. I think depending your industry, you would be able to just, for example, not choose privacy or confidentiality. But if you are in healthcare, you would probably choose also privacy because the enterprises would ask for it. So it depends on what industry you are in and how much time you want to spend on this as well. Again, you could just pick 1 or 2 or all of them. And I mean, just obviously, I mean, I'm not going deeper into any of this. Yeah, I'm not going. Exactly, I'm not going into deeper, but just to give you on what these these pillars include, and we will also talk a little bit about more about AWS and how it's related to AWS. Security means you're going to do access control, identity management. With process integrity, it's more about like testing your it's assurance basically, testing your environment, performance monitoring. With privacy, it's you have the are you like adhering that data usage policy. All the policies that you have, are you actually doing those stuff? The availability piece is basically scalability and fault tolerance. Like if something happens, let's say I'm running my application in EC2, what happens if that EC2 is down? So those type of stuff are the scalability. The confidentiality is basically not giving access to everyone, the data to everyone. having like a granular access. So this number is very low, I know, because it can go up to easily, if you are working with a big firm, up to 6K, even as a small startup. Just doing just as a cash. I mean, it's not including the engineering efforts. 20K is if you are working with a very small firm, maybe. If you are a very small company, this would be the cost at least, and then you would probably pay for more enterprise plans for the SaaS tools that you use because you want to do the SAML, you want to do the SSO. For AWS, which I'm going to talk about in the upcoming slides, you would have to enable some stuff, which Corey Quinn already mentioned many of these, by the way. You would probably enable those stuff, and it would cost you additional money. So you have to get ready. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is as an early stage startup, you have to be willing to pay for this price, both as a money and also the engineering effort is going to be a lot. So that's another cost. And there was a blog, I mean, so they were working with a CPA firm in the United States, and they included all the engineering efforts. I think it was like, as a startup, 100 people, the SOC2 process costed them about 70K. So that's a reasonable expectation. So no matter what they say, compliance means bureaucracy. That means that's also one of the dangers. I mean, the cost is one thing. You may get like some free VC money. That's great. I mean, you can pay 50K. But it would also mean you are going to slow down a bit. So that's OK. I mean, if you are doing this SOC2 compliance stuff, report stuff, then you are going to have some procedures in place which would slow you down a bit in certain cases. That's, you can get over this stuff. Once you do the initial work, it's not as hard, but still there will be procedures. So that's one of the, I think, hidden costs of getting SOC 2. Like, you cannot just give access to everyone in your company to the production environment anymore. You cannot, if a customer is asking for something, you have to get permission before looking at their data. These are the stuff that you should probably do from the start, but usually no startup, I mean, especially in very early stage, they don't do these things as they start. I think these are critical because you also feel safe. I mean, because you're accessing customer data. I mean, you know that you shouldn't do that, but I mean, it's never, I mean, your priority. That's why you don't do it. But with compliance, it becomes your priority, which gives you also confidence. And also, it's important to mention compliance is a subset of security. You will still need to do a bunch of things if you want to actually be secure, but it gives you a fundamental level of security. It's a subset of security. And I think that's also important. I mean, we are going to talk about AWS stuff, but more than half of this SOC 2 stuff is documentation. So you are going to write a lot of documentation. You are going to, these are the documentation we wrote in our Confluence. I mean, we could write some IT security policies if we didn't do like compliance SOC 2, but we wouldn't write all this stuff otherwise. Some of these stuff I think are not really necessary, but some of them are good to have. But as part of SOC 2, you have to write all this stuff. So just as a tip, I have this on my last slide as well, but you could definitely use ChatGPT here. I mean, we use ChatGPT to expand these documentations and make it really work for our use cases. That works actually, interestingly, very well. So, I mean, if you don't know what, like, I mean, if you are working with a firm that are, that's streamlining this, compliance stuff like Drata, Vanta, SecureFrame, maybe you heard of them. If you're working with those, they have templates. Like, I mean, that makes it a bit easier. But still, you have to make it work for your use case. Or if you don't use any of these automation tools, then you would have to figure out some things, and you can just ask ChatGPT, like, can you write me an access, alert system procedure, business continuity plan example, show me like how it works, and it works perfect. At the end would be better. Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if I will have time this way. So let's get into the cloud stuff. So you are probably on AWS or thinking of working with AWS. So in the keynote, also Paul mentioned the shared responsibility model. I mean, so I have it on my next slide as well. That's important because that means you are going to spend less time on certain things if you were on-prem. So AWS makes things easier. It won't solve all your problems with the compliance because there's a lot of documentation. There are a lot of checkboxes you need to check, but it makes it much easier. That's for sure. Also, there's some confusion, like AWS have all these compliance, regulations like HIPAA, SOC2, all sorts of stuff. But that is their own like SOC2 report. So you need to have your own, meaning that you are on AWS. AWS has SOC2. That doesn't mean you are SOC2. You have SOC2 reports, so you have to do your own. But as as a third party you are using, they have SOC2, which means you can use them easily. Without asking them questions. So I think the shared responsibility model is key here because AWS already covers many stuff for you. You don't have to care about networking. You don't have to care about data networking security, data center security, availability between regions. These are the things you don't have to care about, which is amazing. And for also on the upper level, if you are using managed services, it makes things a lot easier because then you would probably, many things like encryption, backups would be outsourced to AWS as well. They would take care of this stuff for you. As you go upper level with managed services, AWS start covering these as well. So, but you still need to enable this stuff with the configuration most of the time. So now I want to talk about AWS specific stuff a bit. Most of the things I will mention here is much easier on cloud. That's why I put them here. These are the things that some of them we did before compliance. Some of them we did after the SOC2 process. So user access controls. Again, these are the things that you need to do as part of your SOC2. So IAM is very flexible. If you know how to use it, if you know the best practices, it's one of the best. But it's also, hard to use it following all the best practices. We use IAM Identity Center. That's ex-SSO. To manage groups, probably, you can use an external identity provider. For us, we use Jump Cloud, but you can use Okta, you can use Google Workspace, and just log in from Google's, from your Google directly to AWS as well, very easily. So, and if you use groups, it makes things a lot easier to give access. So the other one is, this is especially true because it's easy to just give static credentials to, a lot of places. It feels easy, but it gives you, greater exposure to security threats. So there are a lot of documentation in, Bitbucket, GitHub, or GitLab that, you could just connect your AWS with GitHub through OpenID Connect, and you don't need to use any static keys to be able to work, provision, work with your CI. So this is one of the biggest things, one of the biggest requirements. You need to take backups as part of your SOC2. And if you are using DynamoDB, if you are using RDS, S3, even like a snapshot of your EC2 machine, things like this, you need to do regular backups. And with AWS, there is a service called AWS Backup Manager, which makes it a breeze. You would just do some simple configurations, and it would do it automatically for you. Obviously, the only downside is if you are replicating data across regions, across availability zones, and regularly taking backups, it would mean a bit of cost, but that's not a lot usually. So that's also a good practice to, even if you are not doing compliance, you could just use this, and it won't cost you a lot. So the other part is encryption. You would need to encrypt stuff. That's also part of your SOC2 report. So, for example, encrypting your S3 buckets at rest, or it's S3 or other services, especially data-related services, you need to encrypt your data. And it's usually like this, enable or disable type of configuration. Again, additional cost, but also it's very easy. Otherwise, think of like, if you have your own database of like, object storage, whatever, if you are managing that, think of like how you would do it, instead of using S3. So the other one I want to mention is the network access controls. Security groups are usually, simple to use. And There is also VPC flow logs. Corey also mentioned it. I mean, if you enable it for everything, it would cost you a lot. But you can also do it like for a while and maybe put it to Athena and query the data and see if you are doing the right things. So I'm not doing this, nowadays, but our team is actually has a lot of DevOps experience. So this is a tip I got from them. So you could just work with Athena with VPC flow logs, and it would work really, really nice. So the other part is, I mean, I mentioned IAM is hard to follow. The best practices are sometimes, hard to figure out. So there is a relatively new service called IAM Access Analyzer, which would give you really great insights on what you need to focus on. If you have, over permissive access, it would tell you, and you would be able to restrict policies, and it would give you a lot of insights. So the other part is monitoring. I mean, CloudWatch alarms are really useful. Just be careful. I mean, if you create alarms for everything, it will cost you also a lot of money. Usually, CloudWatch is a source of, one of your biggest cost centers. Be careful. I mean, once we had an incident at Atlassian. It would, because of some unintended alarms, we got 20K more with the CloudWatch cost or something like that. So we had similar incidents with Lambda, but CloudWatch was interesting because it was just about CloudWatch alerts. It was just checking the logs, and it would cost a lot of money to just set up those alerts. You can also use CloudTrail or SNS subscriptions on certain events. And there are services that would help you with the compliance stuff. I think, so these are kind of services that you enable, but you usually don't use. But when you do need to use them, they are useful, especially, for example, config, that records every change, every configuration change in your environment. The problem is usually it's hard to query this data. So we have it at Resmo, by the way, a similar functionality, but for everything, every cloud and SaaS. Config is usually disabled. We also, so you probably need to enable it to feed the data to Security Hub and Audit Manager to work. So these are especially useful with Type 2 because it will check for the controls, the Audit Manager, and tell you stuff like if you are failing with something or not. Type 2, I think they're not mandatory, but Type 1, but Type 2, they are useful. So the recommended path, make sure that you really need SOC2. I think this is important as a startup because it's a cost center, both as an engineering cost and also direct cash. The other one is, I was just talking with someone from the AWS startup security baseline team. They were really impressed. Like I showed that we automate this stuff, for example, at Resmo, with literally one click. Like AWS startup security baseline is great because, for example, CIS also is nice. I mean, we do automate this as well, but CIS has a lot of boilerplate. I mean, as Corey mentioned, you don't need to do most of the things that mentioned here. Startup security baseline is really focused on giving you basic things that you need to do with IAM, all that stuff. It's not really hard work, but there is no good automation to enable this. With config, they have a conformance pack for this, but it also requires some manual work. So the other things that I didn't mention here, you need to have an MDM, mobile device management, endpoint security, set up MFA, use SAML. So there would be additional work for you. And again, it's all mostly about documentation. So try to document things as you start your journey. That's important, and ask ChatGPT to expand. Again, if you want to swim in the nice seas and you want to sell to enterprises, you would probably need SOC 2. But also it's important to know when you should start and what you can do before you start, so it makes it this process becomes much more easy. Thank you very much.